The silence in the grand obsidian chamber of the Kravik Dominion was not merely the absence of noise. It was a physical weight, a heavy, velvet oppression that signaled absolute authority. Here, amidst the towering spires of the capital world of Xylar Prime, sound was a currency spent only by the victorious, and today the High Council believed they were the wealthiest beings in the galaxy. The chamber itself was a masterpiece of intimidation, constructed from polished black stone that seemed to drink the light of the twin suns filtering through the high, narrow viewports. Every surface was smooth, cold, and meticulously carved with the history of 1,000 conquered species, their screams silenced by the Kravik war machine, their cultures ground into the quiet dust of submission. At the center of the room, arranged in a vast, tiered semicircle, sat the Archons, the supreme rulers of the Dominion, their chitinous armor gleaming in the dim light, their multifaceted eyes fixed upon the holographic projection floating above the central dais. The projection showed the Terran systems, those scattered, chaotic jewels of blue and green that had dared to resist the inevitable expansion of the Dominion. And for the first time in 3 standard cycles, those systems were dark. Not the darkness of night, but the darkness of total electronic and energetic cessation. The humans had gone quiet. To the Kravik, who worshipped the stillness of the void, this was the ultimate sign of capitulation. High Archon Zale, a creature of immense stature whose carapace bore the scars of the Ascension rituals, leaned forward, his mandibles clicking softly, a sound that echoed like dry leaves in the immense hall. He did not speak immediately. In the Kravik culture, the length of the pause before speech indicated the gravity of the truth about to be spoken. He allowed the silence to stretch, to pull at the nerves of the lesser counselors and fleet commanders gathered in the lower tiers, letting the anticipation build until the air itself seemed thin. He looked out over the assembly, his gaze lingering on Fleetmaster Kalith, the commander who had led the vanguard against the Terran border skirmishes. Kalith shifted uncomfortably, his sensory tendrils twitching against the cold stone of his podium. Unlike the politicians and the priests of the Silent Path, Kalith had faced the humans in the void. He had seen their crude, blocky ships, their reckless maneuvers, and their terrifying resilience. He did not trust this silence. He had heard the chatter of their communication channels, a cacophony of languages, music, and orders that seemed to bleed into one another in a chaotic stream of consciousness. Humans were noise. They were vibration. For them to vanish into the quiet was not a surrender. It felt, to Kalith's honed instincts, like a predator holding its breath. Finally, Zale spoke, his voice a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the floor plates. "The anomaly has stabilized," he announced, his tone dripping with the arrogance of a conqueror who believes the war is already written in stone. "The Terran Union has ceased all transmission. Their warp signatures have dissipated. Their energy grids show minimal output. Our spies report that their fleets have withdrawn to their cradle world, Earth. They have retreated into the gravity well of their birth, seeking shelter where there is none to be found." A murmur of approval rippled through the upper tiers, a soft chittering of agreement. "They realized the futility of resistance," Zale continued, raising a clawed hand to quell the noise. "They understood finally that the Dominion is the inevitable entropic state of the galaxy. We bring order, we bring silence, and now they have accepted their place in the quiet dark." Kalith could not remain silent, despite the breach of protocol. The unease in his gut was a physical knot, a primal warning that the High Archon was misinterpreting the data. He stepped forward, his boots clicking sharply on the obsidian floor, the sound harsh and intrusive in the reverent atmosphere. "High Archon," Kalith said, his voice lower, lacking the resonant projection of the leader but carrying the sharp edge of frontline experience. "With respect to the wisdom of the Council, I must voice dissent." The chamber went deathly still. To interrupt the High Archon during a victory proclamation was tantamount to heresy. Zale's head snapped toward the Fleetmaster, his compound eyes narrowing. "Speak, Kalith," Zale hissed, the sound like steam escaping a vent. "But know that your words will be measured against the silence you break." "I fought them at the Vale of Antares," Kalith said, addressing the room rather than just the Archon. "I saw a Terran cruiser, its hull breached, its atmosphere venting, its reactor critical. By all logic, by all physics, they should have surrendered or fled. Instead, they accelerated. They rammed my flank frigate while broadcasting." Geolocalized transmission. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't data, it was music, a rhythmic pounding vibration that disrupted our targeting sensors. Kalith paused, remembering the chaotic, adrenaline-fueled terror of that moment. "Humans do not embrace silence, High Archon, they fear it. Their entire history is a struggle to fill the void with their voices, their signals, their chaos. If they have gone quiet, it is not because they have given up. It is because they are listening, or worse. They are preparing to make a sound so loud it will deafen us all. Zale dismissed the warning with a wave of his hand, a gesture of supreme condescension. You are traumatized by the chaos of war, Fleetmaster. You see monsters in the shadows where there is only defeat. The humans are resource poor. Their technology is 3 epochs behind our own. They rely on combustion and kinetic impact, primitive tools for a primitive species. They have exhausted their supplies. Their silence is the silence of an empty engine, a dying heart. We have won. He turned back to the holographic display, expanding the image of the Terran system. The Grand Armada will translate to the Sol system in 2 standard cycles to formalize their annexation. We will land on their capital. We will silence their cities. We will bring the peace of the Dominion to their chaotic mudball. The council erupted in polite, rhythmic applause, the sound of claws tapping against stone. Calith lowered his head, not in submission, but in resignation. He knew with a certainty that chilled his blood that the fleet was walking into a trap, but the nature of the trap was beyond his comprehension. He retreated to his station, watching the telemetry, waiting for the flicker, the spike, the anomaly that would prove him right. But the screens remained blank. The Terran silence was absolute. The journey to the Sol system was a parade of arrogance. The Kravik Armada, a glittering river of obsidian and silver ships, moved through the warp streams with the grace of apex predators. They did not mask their approach. Why hide when the enemy has already knelt? On the bridge of the flagship Silence of Ages, Calith stood at the tactical plot, watching the distance to Earth decrease. The other commanders were relaxed, discussing the distribution of spoils, the allocation of human labor, the geological resources of the solar system. Calith, however, kept his eyes on the passive sensors. The silence from Earth had persisted for weeks now. No radio waves, no subspace chatter. Even the background radiation of their industrial output seemed to have been dampened. It was unnatural. A civilization of billions did not simply turn off. Approaching the heliopause, the sensor officer reported, his voice bored. Transitioning to real space in 5, 4, 3. The stars stretched and snapped back into points of light. The massive sphere of the Uit cloud drifted past them, a graveyard of ice and dust. The Sol system lay open before them, and it was empty, not just silent, but physically empty of the defense grids they had expected. There were no mines, no patrol corvettes. The orbital habitats around the gas giants were dark, rotating slowly in the void, apparently abandoned. See! High Archon Zale's voice came over the fleet-wide channel, triumphant. They have fled. Perhaps they have scattered into the deep void, hoping to survive as nomads. The system is ours. But as the fleet moved inward, passing the orbit of the red planet Mars, the sensors picked up the first anomaly. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a weapon. It was a vibration. A low, ultra-low frequency ripple in the fabric of spacetime itself. It was so subtle that the navigational computers compensated for it automatically, treating it as gravitational turbulence. But Calith saw the raw data. "Hold position," he ordered, his voice cutting through the bridge chatter. The captain of the flagship looked at him, confused. "Fleetmaster, the High Archon has ordered advance to high orbit." "I said hold position," Calith barked, striding to the sensor station. He overrode the filtering protocols, displaying the raw wave function on the main screen. It was a pulse, a heartbeat, slow, rhythmically perfect. It originated from Earth, but it wasn't coming from the surface. It was coming from everywhere around the planet. The space around Earth was saturated with a dormant energy field that defied classification. "This isn't surrender," Calith whispered, the scales on his neck rising. "It's a charge. They're charging something." Before he could relay the warning to Zale, the silence broke. It didn't break with a bang or a shout. It broke with a tone. A single, pure, synthesized note broadcast across every frequency, spanning the entire electromagnetic spectrum. It was a tone of such clarity and power that it bypassed the ship's audio dampeners and resonated through the hull, vibrating the very bones of the Kravik crew. It was a C. Natural, tuned to the resonant frequency of the carbon atoms that made up the majority of organic life. It wasn't painful, but it was omnipresent. It demanded attention. The entire fleet froze. On the view screen, the darkness around Earth began to shift. The empty space wasn't empty. The deception technology dropped. The emptiness had been a holographic projection of a magnitude the Kravik had deemed impossible. As the veil fell, the Kravik saw the truth. Earth was not abandoned, it was fortified. A ring of steel and light, an artificial halo, encircled the planet. Thousands of ships, not the blocky, primitive vessels of the early war, but sleek, angular dreadnoughts hung in formation. But they were not positioning weapons. They were positioning arrays. Massive, dish-like structures mounted on the bows of their capital ships, all pointed toward the Kravik fleet. "Shields," Zale screamed over the comms, his composure shattering. "All ships raise shields, fire at will." But the Kravik targeting computers were confused. The enemy wasn't generating thermal locks. They weren't charging plasma banks. They were just broadcasting. The single tone shifted, splitting into a chord. A major triad that rang through the void with the weight of a collapsing star. And then a voice cut through the tone. It didn't come from a specific ship. It seemed to come from the space around them, injected directly into the Kravik communication matrix. "Attention, Kravik Dominion." The voice was human, male, deep, and terrifyingly calm. It lacked the jagged aggression of the Kravik language. It flowed like a deep river. "This is Admiral Vance of the Terran Union. You have entered our home under the assumption of our silence. You mistook our preparation for defeat. We offer you one chance to power down your weapons and hold station. If you fire, you will not be destroyed. You will be overwhelmed." "Arrogance," Zale roared. "They are posturing. Destroy them. Fire the chaotic disruptors." The Kravik fleet obeyed. Hundreds of plasma torpedoes and disruptor beams lanced out across the void, a rain of green fire aimed at the Terran ring. Kalith watched, breath held, expecting the Terran ships to explode. But as the plasma approached the Terran formation, the war storm began. The arrays on the human ships pulsed. It wasn't a shield in the traditional sense. It was a sonic and gravitational wall. The humans projected a wave of focused vibration so intense that it destabilized the cohesion of the plasma bolts. The energy dissipated, scattered into harmless radiation before it could even touch the Terran hulls. The Kravik weapons were literally shouted out of existence. The single chord from the Terran fleet evolved. It became a rhythm, a deep, thundering drumbeat that echoed on the hull of the Silence of Ages. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of a marching army amplified to cosmic scales. Then the real weapon was unleashed. The Terran ships didn't fire lasers. They fired focused sound waves through the medium of a localized gravity field, a technology the Kravik had theorized but never achieved. The war storm hit the vanguard of the Kravik fleet. It wasn't an explosion. It was a dismantling. The resonant frequencies found the weak points in the Kravik molecular bonding. Armor plates simply rattled loose. Electronics vibrated until they shattered. On the bridge, Kalith fell to his knees as the floor shook violently. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the red glow of emergency strobes. The sound was everywhere. It was a roar, a scream, a symphony of destruction that didn't burn but shook the enemy apart. Crew members clutched their heads, their sensory organs overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the sensory input. It was psychological warfare made physical. The Kravik, who cherished silence, were being drowned in the noise of humanity. "Status report," Kalith yelled, struggling to hear his own voice over the thrumming of the hull. "Shields are useless," the tactical officer screamed, bleeding from his ears. "The attack is bypassing energy barriers. It's vibrating the emitters apart. We are losing structural integrity on decks 4 through 12. "Retreat," Zale's voice came over the channel, panic-stricken. "All ships reverse course. Get us out of this." This noise. But the Terran trap had closed. The war storm wasn't just pushing, it was pulling. The gravitational harmonics created a well that made warp travel impossible. The Kravik were trapped in the sound. And then, as quickly as the violence had begun, it shifted. The chaotic roaring faded, replaced by a low, steady hum. The shaking stopped. The Kravik ships drifted, powered down, their weapons systems fused, their engines silent. They were not destroyed, but they were effectively disarmed. The silence returned, but this time it was not the silence of Kravik superiority. It was the silence of a prisoner waiting for the judge. A shuttle detached from the Terran ring. It was small, unarmored, painted a stark white against the black of space. It moved toward the High Archon's flagship. "They are boarding," Kalith said, pulling himself up to the console. He looked at the readings. The Terran fleet hadn't lost a single ship. They hadn't even fired a conventional shot. They didn't want to kill us, he realized, the thought striking him with more force than the sonic wave. They just wanted us to listen. The boarding party did not blast the airlock. They simply transmitted an override code that opened the doors. Kalith, along with High Archon Zale and the surviving bridge crew, waited in the command center. They held their sidearms, but the gesture felt hollow. If the humans could shake a battleship apart, what could a plasma pistol do? The doors hissed open. Enter Admiral Vance. He was not a giant. He wore no power armor. He was dressed in a simple gray uniform, his face lined with age and exhaustion, his eyes sharp and gray like storm clouds. He was flanked by 4 soldiers in heavy exosuits, but their weapons were lowered. Vance walked into the bridge, his boots making a solid, rhythmic sound on the deck. He looked around the devastated command center, noting the shattered screens and the terrified aliens. His gaze landed on Zale. "Hi, Archon," Vance said, his voice naturally projecting in the quiet room. "I trust the volume was sufficient." Zale trembled with rage and humiliation. You barbarians, you use noise as a weapon. You violate the sanctity of the void with your chaos." Vance smiled, a small, sad expression. "Chaos? No, that was precision. If we wanted chaos, you would be dust. We used a specific frequency to disable your war capacity without rupturing your life support. It's a difficult calculation. We spent 3 years perfecting it while you thought we were hiding." "Why?" Kalith stepped forward, unable to stop himself. "You have the power to annihilate us. You could have destroyed the fleet and marched on the Dominion. Why spare us? Why use?" Sound. Vance turned to Kalith, appraising him. "Because, Fleetmaster, silence is death. You Kravik believe that peace is the absence of noise. You conquer, you silence, you stagnate. Humanity learned long ago that peace isn't silence. Peace is harmony. It's the ability to have different voices singing together without drowning each other out." He walked over to the main viewport, looking out at the crippled Kravik fleet. "We didn't develop the war storm to fight you. You were an annoyance, a hurdle. We developed it because we heard something else, something much louder than you." The atmosphere in the room shifted from fear to confusion. Zale straightened up. "What are you speaking of? There is no power greater than the Dominion." Vance tapped a command into his wrist unit. The main view screen on the Kravik bridge flickered to life, overridden by the Terran computer. It showed a star chart, but not of the local sector. It showed the galactic rim, the edge of the great spiral where the stars thinned out into the intergalactic void. "While you were busy expanding your borders and silencing your neighbors," Vance said, his voice dropping to a grave whisper, "our deep-range listening posts picked up a signal." It wasn't random radiation. It was a pattern, a migration. The screen zoomed in. A massive cloud of darkness was obscuring the stars at the galaxy's edge. But as the image enhanced, the cloud resolved into shapes. Billions of them, biomechanical leviathans each the size of a moon drifting through the dark, consuming the light of the stars they passed. "They don't have a name," Vance said. "We call them the Hush. They don't conquer, they eat. They consume energy, matter, and life, and they are completely silent. They are the ultimate expression of your philosophy, Archon." "The perfect silence." Kalith stared at the screen, horror dawning on him. The scale of the threat was incomprehensible. The Kravik Dominion, for all its might, would be a mote of dust against this tide. "They react to energy signatures," Vance continued. "They hunt by detecting the hum of civilization, warp drives, reactors, cities. When they find it, they snuff it out. That is why we went silent. We weren't hiding from you. We were testing our masking protocols. We were learning how to hide an entire civilization from the hunters in the dark." "And the war storm?" Kalith asked, his voice trembling. "A counter-frequency," Vance explained. "We discovered that the Hush communicate through a hyper-complex gravitational lattice. If we can disrupt that lattice, if we can scream loud enough with enough precision, we can break their coordination. We can blind them. The weapon we used on you today was a prototype, a test, and you provided the perfect target practice." The realization hit the Kravik High Council like a physical blow. Their war, their conquest, their pride, it was all meaningless. They had been squabbling over tear. Itery in a burning house. The humans hadn't been losing. They had been preparing to fight a fire that the Kravik didn't even know existed. Zale slumped in his throne, his arrogance drained away. We cannot fight that," he whispered. "The Dominion, we are not ready." "No," Vance agreed. "You aren't. Your ships are built for stealth, which is useless against something that feels gravity. Your weapons are thermal, which they feed on. You are obsolete." Vance turned back to face them, his expression hardening. "But you have resources. You have industrial capacity. You have billions of lives that are currently in the way." You wish to ally?" Zale asked, incredulous. "After we tried to enslave you." "We don't have the luxury of grudges," Vance said, his tone pragmatic and cold. "The Hush will be here in less than a decade. Alone, humanity might survive by hiding. Alone, the Kravik will die. Together, if we combine our acoustic tech with your manufacturing capacity, we might be able to build a war storm large enough to cover the entire sector. We can build a wall of sound that they cannot cross." Vance extended a hand, a human gesture strange to the Kravik, but the meaning was clear. "So, Archon, you can keep your silence and die in it, or you can join the choir, you can make some noise with us. What will it be? The silence that followed was different. It wasn't oppressive, it was heavy with decision. Calith looked at his High Archon, then at the human admiral. He saw the strength in the human stance, the sheer, undeniable power of a species that refused to go quietly into the night. He realized then that the Kravik philosophy was flawed. Silence wasn't strength. Survival was loud. Survival was messy. Survival was a storm. Calith stepped forward, bypassing his leader. He extended his clawed hand and grasped the human's forearm. "The Dominion will not die in the dark," Calith said, his voice firm. "Teach us the song, Admiral. We will help you sing it." The months that followed the Battle of the Silent Ring were a time of unprecedented upheaval for the galaxy. The news of the Kravik's surrender, not to force of arms, but to a demonstration of overwhelming technological superiority, shattered the political landscape of the sector. Lesser species that had lived in fear of the Dominion looked to Earth with a mixture of hope and terror. Who were these bipeds who could shake apart a fleet without firing a shot? But the humans did not build an empire. They built a construction site. Calith, now promoted to liaison admiral, spent his days on the orbital shipyards of Jupiter, working alongside human engineers. The cultural shock was immense. The Kravik worked in near silence, communicating via efficient text streams and subtle gestures. The humans were a riot of noise. They shouted over the roar of machinery. They played music that ranged from aggressive electronic beats to complex orchestral swells. They laughed, they argued. At first, Calith found it exhausting. His sensory tendrils were constantly overstimulated. But slowly he began to see the pattern in the chaos. The noise wasn't waste, it was connection. The humans were constantly synchronizing with each other, sharing emotional states, correcting errors in real time through vocal feedback. It was a dynamic, living network of intelligence that the Kravik's rigid, silent hierarchy could never match. He stood on a gantry overlooking the construction of the Resonance, a ship that defied all previous naval architecture. It was essentially a massive tuning fork, 5 kilometers long, built around a reactor core that could power a small moon. "It's ugly," Calith commented to Chief Engineer Sarah O'Neill, a human woman with grease stains on her face and a tablet in her hand. "She's not built for looks, Calith," Sarah laughed, tapping a command onto her screen that caused a massive hydraulic piston to hiss into place. "She's built to sing. When we fire this thing up, it's going to project a gravitational shear wave that will shatter the crystalline carapace of a hush leviathan at 10 light seconds." "And if the calculations are off?" Calith asked, watching the sparks fly from a welding drone. "Then we turn our own brains into jelly," Sarah said with a shrug. "High stakes, that's how we like it." Calith shook his head, a gesture he had picked up from them. "You are an insane species." "That's why you love us," she retorted, grinning. The integration of Kravik technology into the human designs was the key. The Kravik excelled at materials science, creating the obsidian-like alloys that could withstand immense pressure. The humans provided the energy generation and the acoustic physics. Together, they were building a fleet not of warships, but of instruments. The orchestra, as the soldiers called it. But political tension remained. High Archon Zale, though officially allied, chafed under the human lead. In the council chambers on Xyler Prime, he gathered. "Ed the traditionalists. We are serving the noisemakers," Zale whispered to his conspirators. "We are building their weapons, fighting their war. The hush may be a threat, but are they worse than the loss of our soul? Perhaps we can strike a deal with the darkness. Perhaps if we offer them the humans, they will pass us by." It was treason of the highest order, born of fear and wounded pride. Calith, returning to the capital for a status briefing, sensed the undercurrent of betrayal. The silence in the council chamber had returned, but it now felt secretive, conspiratorial. He accessed the private logs of the High Archon, using a decryption key the humans had quietly given him. A backdoor they had installed in the Kravik networks during the initial confrontation. What he found chilled him more than the void. Zale was transmitting. He was sending a narrow-beam signal toward the galactic rim, toward the approaching cloud of the hush. He was offering coordinates. He was offering Earth. Calith moved with the speed of a combat veteran. He didn't call for guards. The guards were loyal to Zale. He went straight to the human embassy, a fortified compound in the capital city. "Admiral Vance," Calith burst into the office, startling the human aides. "Zale has betrayed us. He has signaled the hush. He gave them Saul's location to buy time for the Dominion." Vance stood up slowly, his face like granite. "When?" "3 hours ago. The transmission is already in the deep void. If the hush are listening, they know." Vance didn't panic. He walked to the window, looking out at the alien city. Then the timeline has moved up. We can't wait for the fleet to be finished. We have to make a stand now. If they bypass the outer colonies and jump straight for Saul, we're dead." He turned to Calith. "Can you seize control of the Kravik home fleet, the ones stationed here?" "It would be a civil war," Calith said. "Zale has the zealots, I have the veterans." "Then start it," Vance said grimly. "We need those ships. The war storm requires a carrier wave. We need your obsidian hulls to act as resonators. Without your fleet, our amplifiers will burn out in minutes." The coup was swift, violent, and loud. For the first time in centuries, the streets of Xylar Prime echoed with the sound of plasma fire and the roar of engines. Calith led his loyalists against the Archon's guard. It wasn't a battle for conquest, it was a battle for survival. Zale was captured in the high tower, cowering beneath the great ancestral statues. "You doom us all!" Zale screamed as Calith leveled his weapon at him. "You bring the noise, you destroy our way of life." "Our way of life is already dead, Zale," Calith said, his voice heavy with regret. "We are fighting for our lives now." He stunned the Archon and took the command circlet, placing it on his own head. He broadcast to the planet. "This is High Archon Calith. The Dominion is under martial law. All fleets are to mobilize and rendezvous with the Terran Union at the Uit perimeter. The enemy is coming, and we will meet them." The combined fleet gathered at the edge of the Sol system. It was a sight that defied history. The jagged black ships of the Kravik flew in formation with the blocky industrial ships of the humans, and in the center, the Resonance and her sister ships, the Dissonance and the Cacophony, hummed with contained power. The tension was palpable. Every sensor was trained on the dark patch of space where the Hush were expected to emerge. They didn't wait long. The signals Zale had sent acted as a lure. The fabric of space tore open, not with a swirl of light, but with a sudden absence of it. A hole in the universe appeared, and through it poured the Hush. They were nightmare made manifest, crystalline biomechanical entities that looked like shattered glass and black oil. They were silent. No engine roar, no communication. They simply slid through the vacuum, thousands of them, heading straight for the warmth of the sun. "Here they come," Vance's voice came over the fleet channel. "Steady, wait for the range." The Hush moved fast, ignoring the laws of inertia. They swarmed like insects, a cloud of annihilation. The forward pickets of the Kravik fleet opened fire with plasma, but the Hush absorbed the energy, glowing brighter as they ate the attack. "Conventional weapons are ineffective," Calith reported from the silence of ages. "They are feeding on the plasma." "Hold fire," Vance ordered. "Let them get closer. We need them in the kill box." The swarm approached the main line. The distance closed. 100,000 kilometers, 50,000, 10,000. The view was filled with the writhing darkness of the enemy. "Now," Vance yelled, "drop the beat." The order was unconventional, but the execution was flawless. The human ships activated the war storm, but this wasn't the precise surgical frequency used against the Kravik. This was raw, unadulterated power. The resonance fired, a visible ripple of distortion. Shot out from the dish, widening as it traveled, it slammed into the front ranks of the Hush. The effect was instantaneous. The crystalline bodies of the aliens, rigid and tuned to absorb thermal energy, were brittle to vibration. The gravitational sound waves hit them like a hammer hitting a pane of glass. The lead entities shattered. They didn't explode. They disintegrated into dust. The silence of the void was filled with the phantom sound of 1 billion tons of crystal cracking at once. "Sustain the rhythm," Vance ordered. "Cycle the frequencies, don't let them adapt." The Kravik ships moved in, acting as amplifiers. They projected the human signal, bouncing it off their obsidian hulls to create a surround sound kill zone. The fleet became a giant speaker system. The music was a terrifying, grinding low-frequency throb that could be felt in the teeth of every crewman. Thrum, crack, thrum, crack. The Hush recoiled. For the first time in their eons-long migration, they felt pain. They tried to scatter to flank, but the sound was omnidirectional. The war storm was a bubble of destruction. The Kravik pilots, inspired by the human defiance, flew their ships dangerously close to the entities, delivering point-blank sonic pulses. Calith maneuvered his flagship into the thick of the swarm. "For the Dominion," he roared, no longer caring about silence. "For Earth, scream AT them." The battle raged for hours. The strain on the human ships was immense. The Cacophony blew a reactor coolant line, venting radioactive steam into space, but kept firing its acoustic array. The Kravik ships took heavy losses from the Hush that managed to get through the wall of sound, their hulls sliced open by monofilament tendrils. But the line held. The ocean of glass was breaking against the cliff of noise. Then the Hush changed tactics. The smaller entities pulled back, merging together to form a massive, singular shape. A superentity. It was the size of a planetoid, a towering spire of darkness that loomed over the battlefield. It began to emit a counterpulse. A silence so profound it began to dampen the war storm. The human equipment started to fail. The vibration was being sucked out of the air. "They're adapting," Sarah O'Neill screamed over the comms. "They're generating a null field, it's canceling out the waves." "We need a spike," Vance said, his voice strained. "We need a frequency they can't cancel, something irrational, something chaotic." "There is no such algorithm," the computer AI responded. "Not an algorithm," Vance said. He opened a channel to the entire fleet. "This is Admiral Vance. Sync your audio inputs to my command channel. Override safeties. Manual input." "What are you doing?" Kaleth asked. "We're going to play them a song," Vance said. "Something analog, something from the old archives, something human." Vance patched a file into the main transmitter. It wasn't a weaponized frequency. It was a recording. A complex, chaotic, emotional piece of human classical music, Beethoven's Symphony No. 9, the Ode to Joy, but amplified and distorted through the gravitational lens. The sound blasted into the null field. It was mathematically complex, full of passion, changing tempos, and layered harmonics. The hush superentity, a creature of cold, binary logic and entropy, could not predict the pattern. It couldn't cancel the wave because the wave was constantly shifting, driven by emotion rather than calculation. The chaotic beauty of the music tore through the null field. The chorus hit, Freud, Schöner, Götterfunken. The gravitational waves spiked. The superentity vibrated. It tried to shift phase, but the music followed it. The sheer complexity of the signal overloaded its hive mind. Cracks appeared on the surface of the planetoid-sized monster. Massive fissures of light erupted from within its dark form. "Maximum output," Vance screamed. "Give them everything." Every ship in the fleet, human and Kravik, redlined their reactors. The volume became absolute. The universe screamed. With a sound that was felt rather than heard, a psychic snap that resonated across the solar system, the hush entity shattered. It didn't just break, it exploded into a cloud of harmless, inert dust. The backlash wave wiped out the remaining smaller entities, turning the terrifying swarm into a glittering nebula of debris. The music faded, the silence returned. But it was the silence of exhaustion, the silence of the aftermath. The fleet drifted in the debris field, battered, broken, but alive. Kaleth stared out of the viewport. The dust of the hush glittered in the light of the sun, creating a beautiful, tragic rainbow. He felt a tear run down his cheek, a human reaction he hadn't realized he was capable of. A channel opened. It was Vance. He looked terrible, blood trickling from his nose, his uniform torn, but he was smiling. "Kaleth," Vance said, "status." "We are operational," Kaleth replied, his voice thick with emotion. "The enemy is destroyed. The silence has been broken." "Good," Vance said, leaning back in his chair. "That was a hell of a concert." In the years that followed, the alliance between the Terran Union and the Kravik Dominion solidified into something new, the Concord of Resonance. They rebuilt their worlds, not as separate empires, but as a dual civilization. The Kravik taught the humans the value of stillness, of contemplation, of listening before speaking. The humans taught the Kravik the power of expression, of art, of the beautiful chaos that drives innovation. They erected a monument in the orbit of Jupiter, made from the obsidian of a Kravik dreadnought and the steel of a Terran carrier. It was a massive chime, drifting in the void. Every year on the anniversary of the victory, they would strike it. The sound would travel through the vacuum, carried by the sensor buoys, a single, pure note that rang out across the sector. It was a warning to the dark. It was a promise to the living. It was a message that said, "We are here. We are listening, and if you try to silence us, we will bring the storm." Deep in the intergalactic void, far beyond the reach of the Concord's sensors, a remnant of the hush drifted. It was small, damaged, a fragment of the great swarm. It processed the data of its defeat. It analyzed the chaotic, painful, overwhelming weapon that had destroyed its kin. It did not understand the music. It did not understand the emotion. But it understood one thing: the galaxy that contained Earth was not a place of silence. It was a place of dangerous, vibrant noise. And for the first time in its eternal existence, the hush felt fear. It turned away, drifting back into the infinite dark, leaving the noisy, bright, terrifying humans alone in their victory. The enemy had thought they won until they heard the war storm, and they would never make that mistake again.